I'm going to say a couple of things about this course, especially about what is it that we will not learn, or what we will learn, but perhaps I would like to start with what is it that we are not going to learn, what is it that we're not going to touch in this course. What we are not going to learn in this course is how to guide an ayahuasca ceremony. So we're not going to talk about ritual aspects, we're not going to talk about energetic aspects, we're not going to talk about ceremonial aspects, we're not going to talk about the music that can or can't be used, we're not going to be talking about how to best protect or clean the space, etc., etc., etc. The reason why we're not going to talk about this sort of more energetic or spiritual aspects of the work is, first of all, because we don't have the authority to talk about these topics. That's not what we do. Like I said, I haven't gone through that training myself. I've shared time and space with people, with many people who have, but I myself have not gone through it. So I'm in no position to give anybody lectures about it. But even if I had gone through it and I was in a position, even if I had been running ayahuasca ceremonies myself for 20 years, I don't think this is the type of knowledge that fits, that can be learned, or even that should be learned in an online course such as this. This is a sort of another realm of the work, and this is not for us to go into, and certainly this course would not go into these things. So what is it that we're going to talk about instead? Well, we're going to talk about things that are, in a way, a lot more down to earth, and perhaps because of this reason, they have been often more ignored by this other work that is more important. And I agree, and we agree, that the principal aspect with this work precisely has to do with ceremonial, ritual, energetic, or spiritual aspects. And precisely because that part is so important and so much focus is put on that, some other aspects that are less important, perhaps more mundane, but that they play a big role in increasing the safety of the things, are often overlooked. And this is what we're trying to put the focus on. So we will be talking about things like physical security, we will be talking about, or safety, we will be talking about psychological safety, we will be talking about what is the flow of participants, and what is the sort of base information that they need to know before they drink ayahuasca. We will talk about how to conduct the first interview in order to detect and do better screening. We will talk about medical questionnaires. We will talk about consent forms, inform releases. We will talk about integration. We will talk about how to deal with emergencies. And we will talk about the risks that exist both for participants and for the guides or facilitators. Well, like I said, the course is going to run for 6 months until mid-December. Basically, the workload, so because there is actually so much to go through, there's about 40 hours of videos plus the lessons, etc. So it's quite the amount of stuff is quite high. What we've done is we spread it over a long time to make it manageable. So we have it's a lot of information, but it's spread over 6 months. So that at the end, the average workload will be about 1 to 1.5 hours per week by average. And we have spread this over 21 weeks. There's also a break in summer, in August. So generally speaking, there's going to be about 1 hour of videos every week. And then every 2 weeks, there's going to be a series of live dialogues which will happen in Zoom. About the videos, like I said, I work with stories. So you will see that there's a lot of stories that are being told in the videos. There's going to be more than 40 videos. And also, there's going to be repetition. So you will see that certain topics, for example, screening or intakes or integration, will reappear in many videos in many ways. This is also a sort of a pedagogical device. People learn better when things are repeated. And because the way the course is organized, that there's sort of like a series of videos and participation, and then there's a final sort of exercise. We don't have exams. There's no, I'm not going to check whether you're learning or not learning. It is the repetition is what helps us ensure that certain things, stick or have like a carrying power. So, please bear with us. If you see that something keeps coming back, it's not on purpose. I would also say that, ask you to be patient. This is the first time that we do this course in English. We only did it for the first time last year in Spanish. I'm not a native English speaker, and none of the other instructors are. You will notice that there's a certain accent, and they will even make mistakes in English. There might be other mistakes. There might be mistakes during the videos. There might be mistakes during the process. Please be patient with us. We're not professional online course makers. We've only done this a couple of times. You might find that certain things, the things are not always exactly smooth, but please bear with us. In terms of the live dialogues, we wanted to create a space in Zoom where we can meet as a group, and when you can ask questions and you can get answers, and also we can hear your stories and learn from them. But we do this from a perspective that some people would be comfortable being in a place together with other facilitators and speaking out and talking about themselves or their questions or their problems, and some people will not, and some people will rather keep their anonymity and their privacy, and they want to participate but they don't want to engage or they don't want to be seen. We have tried to build a system in which both things are possible and everybody can continue learning. The Zoom dialogues are recorded and they will be shared inside the platform, so if you miss them or if you cannot meet that day on that day where the live dialogue happens, you still be able to see the recording later on. There's going to be the way structure, because we keep this course will continue to happen every year. And every year, as we learn, as we integrate, stories and tips from people like you, the things will change slightly and they will continue to evolve. So you will have lifetime access to the platform. Once you have purchased the course, you'll be able to have lifetime access to the platform, and you'll be able to see the updated videos as they come. You will not be able to participate in the live Zooms of this, of the next years, but you still have access to all the videos and the dialogues. You will also have access to the resources, a number of documents and resources that we're going to share with you. Everything from a health questionnaire to a first timer's guide to an integration guide, etc., etc. These documents are also constantly getting updated and improved, and you will have always access to these things. And at the end of this course, there's going to be a final exercise that is a sort of self-evaluation. It has to do with what have you learned, or based on what you have seen in this course, what have you realized that could change or benefit from changing in your own protocols in order to increase the security and the safety of your sessions. This is going to be the final exercise that you will make a sort of self-diagnose in the form of a document, of a written document, and you basically describe what you think were the most important things that you've realized that you are going to change, how this could happen, and what the cost would be. So there's going to be a final exercise. There's also a requirement to view all the videos and a requirement to attend at least around half of the live dialogues. And then when all of these things are put together, you will get a diploma of a certificate of attendance on this course. So who is ICEERS? ICEERS is the International Center for Ethnobotanical Education, Research and Services. It is a non-profit organization based in Barcelona. Currently, it's been in existence for about 15 years. Currently, there's about 13 or 14 people working full-time. Then there's also a group of volunteers. Altogether, ICEERS is not a very big organization. We're about 30 people altogether. And ethnobotanicals, by ethnobotanicals, we refer to a series of plants, of psychoactive plants that have a history of traditional use. So this includes ayahuasca, iboga, the coca leaf. It will also include, tobacco, mushrooms, and many other plants. In practice, most of our work revolves around ayahuasca, iboga, and now more and more the coca leaf and other plants such as bufo, etc. As you all know, these plants that have a history of traditional use, so they've been used traditionally for hundreds, if not thousands of years. In recent years, their use has become globalized. That is, they have left the places of origin, and now they're being used outside in other countries and in other places, and also in other contexts. The work that ICEERS does has to do with the challenges that emerge from this globalization of these psychoactive plants. And our work revolves around changing the relationship of our societies, so what you could call global north societies, or the societies outside of the countries of origin. We would like to change the relationship that these societies have to these plants that are new for us, but they're not new at all for the world or for the places where they originate. We would like to see a world or a future in which these plants are integrated into our societies and they can be used legally and safely also in our societies. And we would like to see a future in which our societies benefit from these plants in a similar way in which indigenous societies have been benefiting from their use for now, many years. So in order to do this, in order to change this relationship, we do work at many different levels. We do scientific research, we do legal advocacy, we do also policy work. So, we also, organize things at the UN level. We have relationships with different governments and international bodies. And we do a lot of work also directly with the community, the international community of people that are working with these plants. You can call them facilitators or guides. And we also run or organize courses such as this to amplify the benefits and reduce the risks or the harms that are associated with these plants. I will talk a little bit about myself. My name is Jerónimo, and soon it will be 20 years from the first time that I took ayahuasca. At this point, I was working on a documentary. Actually, it was a series of documentaries that I was working on together with a Canadian cinematographer. And we had the idea that we were going to make a series of documentaries about the traditional use of these plants. And we had started in Mexico, and we visited communities that used peyote and mushrooms and also salvia divinorum. And when we came to ayahuasca, it was a sort of, at this point, I was 20 years ago, there was a lot less information around that there is now. Nothing like what happens now in Iquitos was happening at this point. And for me, it was quite surprising, both the encounter with ayahuasca and the encounter with ayahuasca cultures, because all the work that we had been done before with these other communities, it felt a little bit more like a sort of almost archaeology. So, we were looking for the last surviving remnants of practices that felt like in the past and had been much bigger than they were today. And in the past, in the further past, before the Spanish arrived to the Americas, it was even, it was even greater. So, but a lot of the work that we've been doing in Mexico felt a little bit like, like I said, like sort of like almost archaeology. Like, you were looking for the last remnants of something that had been much bigger and that now was almost disappearing or in the danger of disappearing altogether. Now, when we arrived in Brazil and we started filming the traditional use of ayahuasca, what we found was something very, very different. What we found was something huge, in no danger of disappearing and actually sort of expanding. It was a very healthy, thriving, living culture around these practices. This was quite a sort of eye-opening experience for me. And at this point, I became fascinated with this and began playing with the idea that perhaps we could make a documentary that would be like a family portrait, when you do a sort of Christmas gathering and you get a family portrait and you have all of the members of the families and different generations and they're all together in just one picture. I wondered if I could make a documentary that would be like a family portrait of all the different traditional uses of ayahuasca that existed in the Amazon. With this idea, I spent the next 10 years basically trying to get everybody inside this family picture. In the process, I traveled a lot through the Amazon, and I visited many different communities and many different practices, all the way from very traditional indigenous use in some quite remote communities in the Colombian Amazon, all the way to much more modern but still traditional manifestations of it, such as the ayahuasca churches in Brazil, which have been existing now for closer to 100 years. There's three main churches, the Daime, the Barquinha, and the Unión de Vegetal. In these processes, I visited all of these places. I spoke and had lengthy interviews with different people working in all of these different lines or traditions. And of course, I was also participating in the rituals themselves, because this process was not just one of sort of a research that was done for a documentary, but also I was at the same time going over my own process with ayahuasca. Throughout these years, like I said, I traveled a lot. I filmed in different stages. At the same time, I kept a day job, and when I was not filming, I was doing also a lot of further research, more like library research. I was reading a lot of anthropology. I read a lot about the history of these things and how these different lines developed, and how were the different indigenous cultures and groups that exist in the Amazon, which is very, very rich. Like I said, it was a process of about 10 years where I was doing. I was just sort of fascinated by this phenomenon. I was trying to document what I was finding. I was finding out a lot about the history of ayahuasca. I was talking to a lot of people working with ayahuasca, and at the same time, like I said, I was undergoing my own personal process with ayahuasca, which also added to the understanding of this or of what was going on. It took me some years to realize that this idea was perhaps a little bit too ambitious. That it was basically impossible to fit all the different traditional manifestations of ayahuasca in one film, maybe even in 10 films. It was simply too large. That's how big ayahuasca was. And I'm only talking about the traditional uses, just the União de Vegetal church in Brazil, which is the largest church in Brazil and which operates legally and has been doing so for many years, has more than 20,000 members. So that gives you an idea. Recently at ICEERS, we tried to estimate what was we tried to make a rough estimate of how many people in the world have sort of partaken or participated in ayahuasca ceremonies, and we came to a number that was close to 4 million. So anytime that you have 4 million people doing anything, you're going to get a lot of diversity and a lot of different ways. At the end, the documentary that we made was very, very different. It was much less ambitious. And it focused on the use of ayahuasca in the treatment of drug addictions. In the process, though, somehow what happened was that this other work, these 10 years of research, this sort of family portrait that I wanted to paint in the form of a film, never came to be. But in another sense, it did come to be, in the sense that the place where this sort of family portrait exists is inside of me. It's in the process that I did and all the people that I met. One of the things that I realized as I was doing this work also is how atomized or sort of, the nature of sort of ayahuasca practices, it happens in sort of bubbles. So that, when I spoke to people in the ayahuasca religions in Brazil, they had no idea of what some of the things that were happening in Colombia, in Ecuador, and in other countries. And when I went to Colombia or Peru, and I told people that there was these very large churches in Brazil, very often people working with ayahuasca had no idea that this existed either. So there is a sort of, while it is very large, it is also sort of very atomized and very, it exists in bubbles that don't always know of each other's existence or are even aware of that this happens. As the film took over and we focused on the treatment of drug addicts for ayahuasca, there was a sort of new level of understanding open up to me, because the work when one is dealing with drug addicts, it's one of change. So if somebody is addicted to drugs and they're trying to change that, then the person has to change to a place where they're no longer addicted to drugs, or where they can live a life where, where drugs are not part of it. So this was a place where the actual sort of the work, the insights, and the effects of ayahuasca have to be turned into real processes of change. And there's basically nothing harder for human beings than changing. So it is possible, but it's not easy, even with the help of plants. So, like I said, that's sort of I went from an understanding that had to do with what was the history and the nature of the different relationships that people were having with ayahuasca, traditional cultures were having with ayahuasca, to a place where the fascination or the object of my research became, okay, we have this drink, this sort of, very interesting preparation, with very interesting effects. Now, what does it take to turn those effects into actual real life in people's, real changes in people's lives? All of this to say that, by the end of those, 10 or 13 years that I spent doing that, I had managed to really build quite a sort of panorama of many, many things related to ayahuasca, from its history to its origins, to its traditional manifestations, to its modern applications, all the way to, okay, what does the experience mean and how does one deal with it? These are the types of things that don't really fit very well in 90 minutes of video. So I wouldn't say that my documentaries actually reflected a lot of these, 13 years of research. But what happened, though, was that this work led me slowly to move away from filmmaking or from documentaries and into sort of a more activist roles around ayahuasca. I started collaborating with a number of organizations that were forming in Spain 10, 13 years ago, first in Asociación Eleusis, which later turned into La Plantaforma, the platform for the defense of ayahuasca. And I also began to collaborate with ICEERS. First, it was a number of just small things here and there. And then through the years, a process that took about 10 years, I became more and more involved until now, which I'm basically full-time working on the topic. All of this to say that although I have a lot of personal experience with ayahuasca, I am not myself an ayahuasca facilitator. I have never served ayahuasca to other people. Most likely, I never will. However, I have, interviewed, spoken about, and had, very, very long conversations and very sort of deep personal relationships with people who work with ayahuasca. As a matter of fact, with hundreds of them. Sometimes, when I run these courses, people ask me, if you don't work with ayahuasca yourself, how can you, who are you to tell us anything about how to run our ceremonies? This, of course, is a very valid question, but I think what it is a misguided question, or is not the right question to ask. It's perhaps easier to understand this, using a metaphor or an example. If you think of a, professional sports team, it can be tennis, it can be football. You have a group of people who are very, very good at, actually playing the sport. They're very good footballers or very good tennis players. And then you have a group of people around them that support them and help them make the work the best it can be. For example, the coaches or the physiotherapists, the people that help with like injuries or the trainings, etc., etc. The work that we do can be understood more in that level. So you wouldn't ask a physiotherapist, who works with football players, how can you help football players if you can't play football yourself? And the physiotherapist doesn't need to play football. It needs to know everything about the body, the muscles, the injuries, and how to help. And there's a lot of help that they can do and support that they can give the players without actually even being able to play the sport themselves. This is a little bit where I stand, or where we stand. We don't we're not experts on running sessions. ICEERS does not run sessions. We don't have, we're not attached to retreat centers, or we're not in the business of doing that. I don't work with ayahuasca. I work with people who works with ayahuasca, and this is also true for the rest of us at ICEERS. What we do is we give support to people who work with plants, and it's a very specialized support that has to do with what happens around the ceremony. In a way, what I have done through all these years, and after talking to these people, is that we have become experts by collecting the best practices and mistakes also that we have learned from people who are actually doing the work. What I said before about how ayahuasca tends to be sort of bubbles, or tends to be encapsulated. What I found, when I started looking, as I said, as the second layer of this, that didn't have to do with, sort of the historical or traditional uses, or more of the anthropological work, but when I started looking at, okay, how do you take the insights from ayahuasca and turn them into real change in people's lives? What do these processes look like, these processes of transformation, and how can they be supported? What I found is that there was different groups had actually developed some quite evolved and, in a way, smart and wise practices about how to make this work. But because the nature of these isolations, these practices sort of remain in that group, and just the people that work with them and the people that learn from them. And here was another group that had some very interesting, also best practices, but they were not talking to each other. So this knowledge was not flowing. By the fact that I was standing outside and I was making the documentary, I was talking to everybody. And also later, as I started working with ICEERS, and I began to organize a series of workshops for facilitators where these topics were discussed, we begin to collect the information that was not in one group or the other, but actually in the collective. And this is, and on top of that, we have been running now for 10 years a free support service for people who have had difficulty with their experiences with plants, and we give these people free integration support and free advice about medical interactions, etc., etc. This, after 10 years and more than 1,000 cases supported, also has become quite a big sort of body of knowledge of in which ways can things go wrong and what can be done about it to avoid it. All of this has been sort of collected and poured into this course. So when you think about it, when you think about yourself, and you think if you had a problem with one of your participants, if you were in a situation where you had where you're not quite sure how to act, or what the next steps are, how many people could you consult on this problem, right? Because basically this is not a problem that you can take to other participants. Maybe you can take this to your partner or to a good friend, but how many people that know your work with plants from themselves? So how many people who are also working with plants do you know that you have the confidence to actually ask these sort of questions about, well, I don't exactly know how to handle this case, or how can I best help this person? I think for your average sort of plant facilitator, this group is rarely more than 5 people. And this is also the reason why the information is not flowing. And what we're trying to do with courses like this is to begin to sort of break this isolation, or create a common space where all of these doubts, but also all of these answers that already exist, that people have learned, can be put into the same place, so everybody can learn from everybody. So that's a little bit about ICEERS, that's a little bit about myself, and that's a little bit about this course. We will be talking more as the course progresses, so there will be ample time to continue, but I think this is a good enough introduction for now. I will just add one thing. It is a personal bias of mine that I like stories. So you are going to see that I like to listen to stories, I like to tell stories, and I tend to collect stories. So you will see that during this course, I'm going to tell a lot of stories. But these are not stories about, the one day I went to brush my teeth and such and such happened. The type of stories that I'm interested in are the type of stories that carry a lesson within, stories that carry a teaching. So these are the stories that I'm going to share. Stories about facilitators, stories about ayahuasqueros, stories about people who drink ayahuasca and what happens to them, but stories of others, stories where somebody learns something, or stories where there's something for everybody to learn. Why? Because I think stories are one of the most effective ways of teaching and of learning. I'm personally, I've also had, in my day job and in another life, I have done a lot of teaching in other topics, and I found that this is one of the most valuable and sort of memorable and easy to work with. So you will see I'm tell stories, and I also want to say that I'm interested in yours. All of the stories that I bring are not, some of it are my own, but most of them are the stories of other people. Like I say, I collect them. We are in a constant process of learning from people who are on the ground, on the field, doing this work. So, I'll be telling stories, but please remember that I'm also interested in yours. So there's not going to be, it's not just me in this course, although I will be teaching the first units. There's also other teachers. There's going to be, first of all, is David Londoño, who is a clinical psychologist, but has a very long personal engagement with traditional medicines. He has worked at the ICEERS Support Center. He has been therapeutic coordinator of a number of centers in the Amazon. And he himself has seen hundreds of cases, if not thousands of cases, of what happens when people, start drinking ayahuasca and going through these processes. He is going to talk about what lessons from psychology can ayahuasca facilitators, who are usually not psychologists, what lessons can they learn, and what are things that they should take into account. There's also Marc Achala. Marc Achala is also a psychologist, and he's founder of the ICEERS Support Center, and he was running it for about 10 years. So Marc has seen hundreds, literally nearly 1,000 cases in the support center in these 10 years, and he's going to bring a lot of sort of knowledge about what are the lessons learned after these 1,000 cases, which are mostly had to do with incidents, mostly had to do not so much with things went right with plants, but when things didn't go so well with plants, or there was difficulties, or even very big difficulties, or even crisis, and he's going to bring that information and share it with you in his course. And then we will also have Jose Carlos Bozo, who's ICEERS scientific director, and he's going to talk about safety in ayahuasca ceremonies, but bringing lessons from scientific research and what we have learned from science, about drug interactions and all of these other things. There's going to be about 40 videos. This course is 6 months, so you will see that you will sort of meet all of them slowly, and you will have time to interact with them, not just in the videos that they will record, but also live. We will have a series of live sessions where you'll be able to ask questions and be in dialogue with them.